Hello everybody. Hope all are fine and safe at home. I suppose all of you have gone through the poem Abu Ben Adam. I expect that you all have completed the exercises and are ready to submit your notebooks for correction. Today we start with a new lesson, The Little Match Girl. Though a tragedy, it is a nice work of literature. Hans Christian Andersen was born in the town of Odense, Denmark on April 2nd, 1805. Andersen was a prolific writer of plays, travelogues, novels, and poems. He achieved worldwide fame for writing innovative and influential fairy tales, which have been translated into many languages. The meaning for word innovative is advanced, or we can say forward looking. Some of his famous fairy tales are The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Nightingale, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, Thumbling, and The Princess and the Pea. Andersen had a very unhappy childhood, and much of his stories reflect this sadness, dealing with loss and death. However, his stories are not restricted to children alone and have themes of universal appeal that transcend age and culture. Let me first tell you the story in a nutshell so that you can enjoy and understand it better. The Little Match Girl is a fairy tale with a tragic end. It was first published in 1845. Andersen got inspiration for this story from a drawing by Danish artist Johann Thomas, where a girl was seen selling matches on the street. It is also based on his mother's hardships as a child. The story is about a poor, pathetic little girl whose father sends her to sell matches on a cold New Year's Eve. It describes how the brutal cold of the night and the apathy of the people, especially the wealthy, lead to her tragic end. The meaning for the word apathy is indifference, or we can say lack of concern. It's the opposite of sympathy. The Little Match Girl is possibly one of the saddest holiday stories ever told. Andersen in this story portrays about a helpless little girl whose story is heartrending and ignites the feeling of sadness in the readers. Children, before we start reading and explaining, let us watch a short animation of the story. Getting a visual of the story will help you remember it better. Like when we watch a movie, we get to know the story better than just listening to the story without any visual.
This is the story of a poor young girl who sold matches in the street. This story took place a long, long time ago on a New Year's Eve. It was snowing heavily, and it was severely cold outside. In the cold and the darkness, there walked along the street a poor little girl. She had no extra clothes to cover herself from the cold, and she had no shoes to save her feet from the freezing cold. She had slippers on when she left home, but they were much too large for her feet. They were her mother's slippers. She sold matches for a living. That day, she left home to sell matches on the street as usual.
Oh God, it is snowing heavily. It is too cold today. What will I do? If I don't go to sell matches, my family will not be able to buy food.
She decided to brave the cold and sell matches. She was just about to cross the street when a horse carriage sped towards her. She was scared, and she ran across the street to save herself. She had lost both her slippers while she was running.
Oh, my slippers. I need them. My legs are getting cold.
She was just about to cross the street when a boy grabbed her slippers and ran away with them.
Hey, stop! Those are my slippers.
But the boy didn't. He ran away. So the little girl continued walking with her bare feet. Her feet had turned blue in the chilling cold.
My leg. They are paining. Oh, they're so cold today.
In an old apron that she wore, she had bundles of matches, and she also carried a bundle in her hand. She sat a corner in the street and waited for customers to buy matches from her. She waited for a long time, but no one came to her. She never lost her hope and continued to wait for customers. It was snowing heavily now. The poor little girl was shivering with cold and hunger. The snowflakes fell on her long hair, and she wiped it off of her shoulders. She smelled a roasted goose being cooked at a nearby house.
People are celebrating today, but there's nothing to eat at my house. God, please help me to sell some matchsticks.
The little match girl then continued to wait for a customer.
Oh God, please help me to sell these matches. I also want to buy a goose for my family.
She tried keeping her little feet underneath herself to cover from the cold. But that was of no use. She wanted to go home because of the cold. But then, what would she tell her family? Her father would definitely be angry at her if she returned home without any money in hand. She looked around at the beautiful mansions in the street. She thought about her home. It had only a roof above, and that too was full of holes. Her little hands were nearly frozen with cold now.
I can light a match to warm my fingers.
So at last, she drew one match out and struck it. It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle, and she held her hands over it. The fire warmed her fingers.
Oh, it feels so good. I'm getting better now.
But once the flame went out, she started feeling the cold again. So she rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly. Then a miracle happened. She could see through the wall where the light of the match fell. She could see what was going on inside the house. She was being pushed into the world of fantasy. She could see everything in that room. There was a white cloth spread on the table, and there were some nice plates arranged on top of it. A stuffed roasted goose was placed at the center, and it had a delicious smell. Then she saw something she couldn't believe. The goose jumped from the dish with a knife and fork still in its breast, and it ran straight towards the little girl. But the match went out, and everything vanished quickly. Then she lit another match. This time, she saw another fantasy. She was under the most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily decorated than the one she had so far. She was fascinated by that Christmas tree. She walked forward and stretched out her hands to touch them, but then the match went out. Then she struck another match. This time, she saw a long trail of light in the sky.
Huh? It looks like a star has fallen from the heavens. It seems someone is going to die tonight.
It was her grandmother who told her that if a star falls from the sky, then someone will definitely die to send the soul back to heaven. She struck another match against the wall. In the brightness, she saw her dear old grandmother. She loved her grandmother a lot. Her grandmother always showered her with love and kindness. She moved the light to the front and saw the smiling face of her grandmother. She was so happy to see her grandma right there. Then she started crying.
Oh, dear Grandma, please take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You too will vanish, like the New Year's feast and the beautiful Christmas tree.
The little match girl didn't want her grandmother to leave. She knew that her grandmother will vanish when the light burns out. So this time, she lit the whole matchsticks together. The match burned a shining light. Grandmother then came close to the little girl. She looked at her with compassion. She took the little girl in her arms and flew up into the sky. They flew far above the earth, away from cold and hunger, to the heavens. The next morning, people gathered around the dead body of the little match girl. She was frozen to death the previous night. Her body was leaning against the wall with a smiling face. People wondered how could anyone die with a smiling face? But no one could imagine the beautiful things she had seen, or how happily she had gone with her grandmother into the heavens.
Children, now let's come to the lesson. While I'm reading, use your text and read with me. It was bitterly cold, snow was falling, and darkness was gathering, for it was the last evening of the old year. It was New Year's Eve. In the small para, the author sets the stage of the story. He tells us that it is New Year's Eve, the last day of that year. It's snowing and freezing cold, and it's also getting dark. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl walked bareheaded and barefoot through the streets. Bareheaded means without scarf, barefoot without slippers. She had been wearing slippers, it is true, when she left home, but what good were they? They had been her mother's, so you can imagine how big they were. The little girl had lost them as she ran across the street to escape from two carriages that were being driven terribly fast. One slipper could not be found, and a boy had run off with the other, saying that it would come in very handy as a cradle someday when he had children of his own. Handy, here it means easy to use. So the little girl walked about the streets on her naked feet, which were red and blue with the cold. Naked feet, barefooted. In her old apron, she carried a great many matches, and she had a packet of them in her hand as well. Nobody had bought any from her, and no one had given her a single penny all day. She crept along, shivering and hungry, the picture of misery. Poor little thing. Crept, it means walked very slowly. The girl came to the street to sell matches with her mother's slippers, which she lost while running to avoid a speeding carriage. A boy took other one and also mocked her that he would use it as a cradle later. She now walked about barefoot, trying to sell the matches, but nobody was interested to buy. She looked a picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long golden hair, which curled so prettily about her neck. But she did not think of her appearance now. Lights were shining in every window, and there was a glorious smell of roast goose in the street, for this was New Year's Eve, and she could not think of anything else. She huddled down in a heap in a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected further out into the street than the other. But though she tucked her little legs up under her, she felt colder and colder. She did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches and earned not a single penny. Her father would be sure to beat her, and besides, it was so cold at home, for they had nothing but the roof above them, and the wind whistled through that, even though the largest cracks were stuffed with straw and rags. Her thin hands were almost numb with cold. If only she dared pull just one small match from the packet, strike it on the wall, and warm her fingers. The snowflakes on her hair made her look beautiful, but her mind was full of the smell of delicious roast goose. Hungry and tired, she sat down between two buildings where the wind didn't trouble her. She cuddled her legs so that she can be warm, but she was getting frozen in the cold. She was scared to go home, fearing her father and also that her house was in a very bad state. She pulled one out. Scratch! How it spluttered and burned. Spluttered means it's a slight noise produced when a match starts burning. തീപ്പെട്ടിയൊക്കെ ഉരസുമ്പോൾ കേൾക്കുന്ന ആ ശബ്ദം. It had a warm, bright flame like a tiny candle when she held her hand over it. But what a strange light! It seemed to the little girl as if she was sitting in front of a great iron stove with polished brass knobs and brass ornaments. The fire burned so beautifully and gave out such a lovely warmth. Oh, how wonderful that was! The child had already stretched her feet to warm them too, when out went the flame. The stove vanished, and there she sat with the burned match in her hand. Desperate, she lights a match. The light not only brought her warmth, but also gave her a warm experience of being near a beautiful great iron stove with brass knobs and brass ornaments. It could have been her innermost feeling, being visualized. We understand that she wished to be in a warm and cozy place. She struck another. It burned clearly, and where the light fell upon the wall, the bricks became transparent like gauze. Gauze is a transparent cloth. We use it for medical purpose. She could see right into the room where a shining white cloth was spread on the table. It was covered with beautiful china, and in the center of it stood a roast goose stuffed with prunes and apples, steaming deliciously. Covered with beautiful china. What's it meaning? Vessels made up of china clay or porcelain vessels. Okay. And what's the meaning for prunes? Prunes are dried European plums. And what was even more wonderful was that the goose hopped down from the dish, waddled across the floor with carving knife and fork in its back, waddled straight up to the poor child, then out went the match, and nothing could be seen but the thick, cold wall. Waddled, the meaning for that word is walk like a duck, and carving knife is a knife used to slice thin cuts of meat. It means when in desperate situations, like when you are left with no hope, the wishes of your heart does come to shape in front of your eyes like how you see a dream. The first match she struck showed one such feeling. She then struck the second, and as expected, her second necessity to satisfy her hunger was seen. With this light, she visualized a good New Year Eve's meal of roasted goose. In her vision, it means when in desperate situations, like When you are left with no hope, the wishes of your heart does come to shape in front of your eyes like how you see a dream. The first match she struck showed one such feeling. She then struck the second, and as expected, her second necessity to satisfy her hunger was seen. With this light, she visualized a good New Year Eve's meal of roasted goose. In her vision, the goose even jumped out of the plate with the knife and fork on its back and walked towards her. That's all for today, children. Now that we are getting used to online education, you would be understanding these classes better. Go through the taught parts a couple of times. In case any part needs explanation, do inform me. And one more thing, get ready for a test paper on the previous poem, the Abu Ben Adam. The date of test shall be informed soon. Okay then, thank you. Bye.